Okay, now I'm going to channel Pete on his sickbed, so forgive me if I'm not nearly as smart as he is about the Nielsen data. And a lot of this stuff is already sort of merged between Pew and Nielsen data. But there are implications for this. This is a horrible slide to look at, but the big point to learn off it is that channels of contact and connection to all sorts of brands have multiplied and have different meaning to people now. One of the striking things that we see in our data, I know Nielsen sees it in its data, is that people segment their communications patterns and they segment their information search patterns depending on their needs. If it's a general search or general information query, they're perfectly happy to have it be relatively impersonal or connected to information sources where they don't necessarily know who's the person on the other end of that exchange. But if it gets more complicated, if it gets more personal, if it gets more sort of wrought with emotion, they want to deal with people. And so there are ways now that people choose the communication pattern and choose the information inputs they do depending on what their need is and the urgency of it and the personal character of it. The other sort of wonderful thing that Nielsen knows in spades is that consumers go on a journey through their purchasing decisions. The Nielsen data, and I think this comes from long ago, Procter & Gamble data and other sort of major retailers, at the point of initial consideration, people are thinking about 1.5 brands. They've become aware of them through advertising, through coverage, through word of mouth, whatever it is. As they become more active in their evaluation of whether I should purchase this product or not, they add another 1.7 brands to the mix as they're doing their research. So by the point of purchase, they're thinking about 3.2 brands. That's not much. And it's a hard process to intervene in. It's a hard process to get yourself known in. And the internet and mobile connectivity have sort of changed the mix in interesting ways because now at the point of purchase, increasingly, media can become part of the story. And finally, there's a point of the process that almost never occurred in the pre-internet age, which is engagement with the brand, with the purchase, with the engagement that they've had with you in experiences. They talk about it, they comment on it, they rank it, they rate it, and things like that. So the journey of connection to products and services is much more a feedback loop now. It's got many more steps to it, and yet it's still a fairly bounded environment. Social media fits into this mix. Again, I'm sorry the slide is so small, but all you need to know is that social media grows in importance as people get closer to the point that they want to make the purchase. The initial consideration is the left column there. And social media matters a bit there, but it's much more involved once people make the decision to be actively engaged with research. And of course, at the moment of purchase, it's now considerably more likely and is beginning to come close to rivaling the in-store personnel influence that people have on their decisions. Okay. Pete has a lot more slides on this that will be available in our slide deck, and I would commend that to you because he's really smart, Nielsen's really smart, and they know the world in ways that really matter to you. But I thought I'd use the last few minutes of my presentation to talk about what's coming. Lousy slide, but it's just a marker for you to look at later on. These are trends that both Pete and I were thinking that were important to highlight to you in the coming year, some of which you've already had reference to, some of which you haven't. He talks about mass socialization. I mean, earned media and the way that the whole purchasing process, the whole engagement with brands is transforming. It's becoming a much more social thing. And don't just think social media when you're doing this. It's smart to be thinking about email, instant messaging, texting, word of mouth, face-to-face, all that sort of stuff. The whole purchasing process, the whole engagement that people have with media is a social experience now. Information, media, advertising, and all sorts of things are part of the social currency that people exchange with each other as they're getting along with each other and sharing things. There'll be a proliferation of platforms. Of course, 2010 was a gigantic year with the introduction of the iPad and tablets, but there will be more devices and more things that come online, and people will be thinking about how they allocate their media experiences, their attention experiences, and their purchasing experiences connected to that. Mobile comes of age. This is a point that's connected actually to the bottom point about digital downsizing. As apps become more embedded in the media ecosystem and in the devices that people use, we think that those themselves will become important filters for people's information. My friend Clay Shirky, who's written 2 wonderful books about social media, talks about the current environment as one that's not necessarily broken, it's just sort of out of sync. And that the big problem of this era, he describes, is that we don't have yet sufficient filters to get us to the right information in the right way, in the right time. Well, these filters are partly being built in the apps environment as people are now customizing the experience, tailoring it, learning from it, and adjusting to it in ways so that it's not just the wild, wild west or the Bermuda Triangle of information experiences, but people will now beginning to make choices about which media they rely on, which apps make the most difference to them, which are most compelling and fun. Facebook is, is the big player in this environment. Wired Magazine, as you no doubt know, had a fabulous cover story about 4 months ago, the tagline of which is "The web is dead, long live the internet." And it talks about the rise of apps, the rise of peer-to-peer, the rise of other things that happen on the internet besides what happens on the web layer. For my money, I think the web isn't dead. I mean, there are too many occasions when people are doing searches where they want the widest array, the most diverse array of material possible. And they won't necessarily be content with having apps deliver it up to them, that they will want to be much more in control of where they go, how they go there, what they make meaning from it, and encountering communities that they don't necessarily have access to through apps. So I'm thinking that there will definitely be a place for the web. And by the way, the web is going to get much smarter in the next couple of years. There's just ways in which search engine companies are not standing still. There are ways in which data mining is aggressively moving forward and stuff like that. So the web itself is going to get smarter at delivering to people information that they want in different ways. But there's definitely an arms race between the web and the non-web about how people are getting information, what media experiences they have. And I want to also highlight the one on this list about relevance and privacy. Watch the Federal Trade Commission. They are just now beginning to disgorge some of the findings, some of the reports, some of the white papers that emerged from a series of conversations they've been having for the past 2 years with privacy advocates, companies, telecom purveyors, ISPs, and stuff like that. It's not entirely clear that the FTC is going to move aggressively into this space and give rules, but they clearly have preferences. They want consumers to be in control of things, and the chairman's announcement last week that he really would appreciate the technology community offering up people the option of a do not track experience online. He's serious about that, and obviously some browser players are already responding to that, and some companies are thinking about that. This is a critical uncertainty about the life that you're marching into. We don't yet know what the laws and even what the norms are about how people want to manage their privacy and their identities online. And the confusing thing from a research perspective that I'm sure you guys see all the time is Americans will say that they cherish privacy as a core value. We want to be left alone. We want to control our identities. And yet, if you give them specific contexts about transactions, would you be willing to give up your email address in return for this? Would you be willing to friend us in Facebook in return for this? Preferred customer cards and stuff like that. People are mostly transactional when they're thinking about the real-time experience of their privacy. And so while they say it's a value and tell research companies like mine that it sort of stands up there in the high tier of things that they cherish the most, in fact, many people are very driven by context and circumstance as they're making decisions about the things to give up or the things to share with companies. But it's a situation where the wrong move by any one of the big or multiples of the big players in this space could change the nature of that conversation. If we have an Exxon Valdez of data somewhere, that conversation is going to change. If enough people get hurt by it or scared by it, the whole idea that you can track and target and stuff like that, the mechanisms that you're now using for that might not be as easy to use in the future depending on how this debate comes up. So I would watch that. And then finally, let me suggest that there are a couple of things to watch, even in the early months of next year, for signals about how the marketplace, the technology space, the consumer and media spaces might be changing. The New York Times is going to flip the switch on content metering soon, and a bunch of media properties are already doing it. A bunch of players in this room are thinking about it. It's a brave new world. Nobody knows exactly how it's going to work. Nobody knows exactly how distressed the heaviest users online of the New York Times will be if they're asked to pay for access to content after a certain period of time. But this is definitely a big trend in publishing, and there will be a tremendous amount of marketplace attention to this, and we're going to be researching it as well. So new business models are going to be emerging. The technology experience is going to be more enhanced. And if you haven't already got it sort of on your radar screen, Nielsen is continuing to do refinements of the work that it is trying to explore on how people use their 3 screens. And they're trying to capture more refined, more nuanced, more actionable data on your part. And so Nielsen is continuing to sort of to fiddle with the dials on that stuff. It's worth noting. I'm sure ComScore and other companies are doing the same. But the Coalition for Innovation Media Measurement, CIMM, some of you are, I think, probably contributors to it, has launched an amazingly massive and powerful research initiative to understand how people allocate their attention. It's not governed by the metrics that might be familiar to you. God knows click-stream metrics are not even part of the mix here. But they're giving people meters, diaries, and multi-methods of capturing what they're exposed to and stuff. And we'll begin issuing reports, I think, in the first half of 2011 about what they're learning. It will be the first time that I'm aware of that, besides the crude tool of time diaries, that people are going to get to the sort of core issue that's at the center of the information environment and ecosystem we live in. It's not so much how we allocate our time, it's how we allocate our attention, particularly in a continuous partial attention mode or multitasking mode. Figuring out exactly what increments of time or what increments of effort we devote to specific things really matters, and SIM is going to be talking about that. I've already talked about the privacy debates that are coming out of the FTC and the browser world. The net neutrality debates are really important for you guys, too. The Federal Communications Commission has got a plan in place that is forgiving in some respects of some of the core principles of net neutrality that people in the technology community have wanted for a long time, especially in the wireless space. And how media companies and how ISPs and others and telecoms deliver material is going to be governed by the decisions that are made by the FCC and eventually maybe Congress or maybe even the courts about what telecoms and what ISPs can do about charging for different rates of delivery of content and things like that. We don't have a dog in this fight, obviously, but I can't even predict how it's going to come out, but it's definitely worth your watching with all the free time you've got. Spectrum allocation debates are equally important to this. I mean, the FCC is trying to free up more spectrum for the wireless stuff that's turning everybody in this room on. And it's not entirely clear how much will be played out. There are important other stakeholders for spectrum who care about how spectrum is allocated, starting with first responders. The cops and firemen and even the military has been using pieces of spectrum that they won't happily give up. TV stations have been using pieces of spectrum that are in contention. And so, again, it's hard to predict exactly how this marketplace is going to play out, but again, you're going to have to pay attention to it. And finally, just to freak you out, if you haven't already heard about it, the Internet of Things is already upon us. There are many more devices now that have connectivity than people. Right now, we think there are between 7 and 8 billion people and things that are connected through the internet or IP addresses or some Bluetooth or something like that. Intel predicts that by the year 2015, that 7 to 8 billion will be 20 billion. Ericsson, the telephone company, predicts that by the year 2020, it will be 50 billion.